Morning, everyone. Thanks for being with us. Yeah, there we go. Fantastic. Thank you. It's good to have you all along. Welcome to the session. That's my man. CEO talks on emerging areas. What's our agenda today? We're going to focus largely on two words. One, emerging. This whole emerging areas agenda that the ADB has come up with is a really interesting evolution of the way they do business. And it's something we want to consider a little bit. And it makes me think of chaos theory. An emergent property is one that emerges from a background of complexity, of chaos, of unpredictability. Now, I'm not saying that the ADB is a chaotic and unpredictable environment. Please do not hold me to that. But the interesting thing about emergent properties is they have order. They are no longer chaotic. They have a new paradigm of behavior and outcome that is positive and ordered. And so this emerging theory that we're talking about here is about how can we consider that new paradigm? What are its priorities? What are its boundaries? What does it look like? What are the terms and the definitions that we use to frame it? And what is its modus operandi? So that's one of the areas we want to consider today. Second word is ecosystems, a word you've heard a lot. But in this new paradigm, what are the life support systems that are new and interesting and different to the old order? It's another thing we want to consider today. How do those elements of the ecosystem connect and combine? How do we finance them? How do we connect them? How do we inspire and grow them? How do we regulate them? So those are basically the two large framing issues I think we're going to start talking about, but then the conversation could go anywhere, and hopefully you'll be part of that. So let me introduce the panel straight away, and I'll begin, if I could, with if you could just give a quick 30-second definition of what you do, not who you work for or the boilerplate stuff, just what you do, and then we'll get on to the substantive conversation. So let's, Melody, begin with you, please.
I am not ready with the mic, so thank you for that, and good morning, everyone. So my name is Melody Ovenden, and I am on this panel because I'm leading the Oceans program at the ADB. So when you talk about ecosystems and the ecosystem that we work in, that is why I'm here. So, but I also have an additional dimension, which I've come from the safeguards background here at ADB in social safeguards. So when you look at it from an ecosystems approach, we also see it from the environmental side and the social side. So thank you so much for having me.
And the interesting thing is, again, as we talk about redefining our paradigms, Melody is going to talk about oceans, not in the context of small island developing states or small independent nations as they're generally done, but in terms of big ocean states, because the big ocean is what defines a lot of where they're going. So we'll put that on abeyance. Richard.
Hi, I'm Richard Fechner, and I lead an advisory business. So we're consultants, and we're set about solving the world's biggest problems. And so energy change and energy transition accounts for the bulk of what we do globally. I've got a background in developing nations work as well, albeit in small island states, and that started, sort of decades ago in water energy in that mix, and have been passionate about that. One of the things as well, I think the challenge we have to face is the sustainability piece, and what does that mean for communities where we operate, and how we can level up the playing field. And energy is a big piece that has to play with health. And with gender equity in education and roles as well.
Great, thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Fiza Farhan, and I'm from Pakistan, but I'm mostly working all over the place. I advise governments, private sector, UN agencies, development organizations on various fun, innovative projects, which are basically innovative and fun solutions to complex and conventional development problems. So I very much look forward to hearing from you guys today and sharing some of those innovations with you. And previously I was a practitioner. So I was a CEO of two companies, one Pakistan's first energy company, and second a microfinance entity. So I've been in that practitioner landscape earlier, and now I'm on that advisory and policy making realm. So looking forward to the conversation today. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Matthew Mendes. I'm currently the managing director for Chemonics International, but I come to this table because I've spent 45 years in development, starting my career at the World Bank when I was only the second person with the word renewable energy on his CV at the World Bank. I was hired actually by the first person that came from the Philippines, Dr. Ernie Tirado. And so I say I was at the beginning, you talk about emerging, I was there when the Big Bang happened, when we just started thinking about renewable energy and trying to clean up and energy efficiency. And banks were not actually lending for that. At that time, they were really lending for oil and gas and coal development. And so now here we are, at a very important transition phase. I've seen a lot over the years. I'm sort of the grandfather on this panel. I want to bring that knowledge and experience. And I think I have a few things to say that we'll talk about in terms of where the transition is going and what it's going to need to be successful. I'll stop here.
Aloha, everyone. I'm Lorena Kiba from the wonderful island of Hawaii and a former commissioner with the Hawaii Public Utilities Commission and also the OPRA. Some of them have been going to the Office of Pacific Energy Regulators Alliance events, the former OPRA Technical Assistance Team Leader. So it's so great to see many of the big ocean state leaders and regulators in the room today from the Pacific region. I'm currently the CEO of my own consulting firm, LHA Ventures, continuing to advise on energy and regulatory policy. And I think as Tamar led us out, it really is an interesting dynamic here, and many of the folks in the room, once we hear from the panel, hear the dialogue from all of you in terms of the leadership and the role that you can play as part of the Blue Continent. We are the largest landmass when you think about how we're connected by the oceans and in the Pacific and Asia region, and even across the world in terms of island nations that are on the other side in the Caribbean and in the Indian Ocean. So we provide dynamic leadership, and we're going to share some thoughts with you on some how I think, even though Tamar talked about, is it chaos, is it crisis? My favorite saying is, out of crisis rises the opportunity for change and innovation. So let's get to it, and we'll get talking about it.
Fantastic. So folks, a really diverse, interesting panel with an incredible history of experience and activity. And there's also one special guest on this panel today, and that is you. So we're not going to sit here and talk amongst ourselves and have you guys look at your phones. We want you to actually participate. So at any point in the conversation, if you have a question, stick your hand up and get involved, because we're not going to do the we'll talk for 45 minutes and then spend 10 minutes getting to the audience. I want you to engage yourself, and I might even come to some of you and pick you out and say something, because I know a lot of you guys here have got something to say. All right, so let's get on with that. So let's kick off. And Matthew, as the grandfather, as you framed yourself.
And I feel young now.
You dug that hole, not me. You dug.
Because I have grandchildren. That's why I'm here.
So look, you talked about the Big Bang 45 years ago, and the scary thing is it was 45 years ago, and yet here we are still having these conversations. But just please tell us how we should be thinking about the Big Bang that happens now, this emerging areas idea, and the landscape that we face today. What are the problems that stop us from actually making faster progress, and how do we get past them? Give us some examples of how you think we can reframe things.
Sure. Yeah. So, to carry that analogy on.
A bit closer to your mouth.
Yeah. To carry that analogy on, I think we're forming planets, and hopefully we're going to form planets that are sustainable, clean, and going forward, renewable and don't require drilling fossil fuels. So let me start by saying one of the things that I've observed over the period working, there's a big focus on financing the the supply side, whether it's generation, transmission, distribution, or even extraction, as we've been spending a lot of time in the last couple of days looking at critical minerals, which we'll need. But at the end of the day, it's all to provide services to consumers. And in a country and a continent like Asia, where we have a large population of very poor people, it's also important that we don't forget that at the end of the day, these services have to help them. I always hear the statement, "Oh, we're building all this infrastructure. A rising tide will raise all boats." But if you don't have a boat, you're going to be left behind. You're actually going to sink, right? So it's really important that as we go forward, we think about the demand side of the equation, because the transformation is not just about cleaning up generation and distribution and transmission. It's also about the technologies that.
Well,
we're
what does
gonna
that
have
mean?
to
What
adapt.
does thinking about the demand side involve?
All right, let's take a specific example. I'm working in Sri Lanka for the USAID on a Sri Lanka energy program, and we just completed a grant to address 2- and 3-wheelers who are consuming petrol. And because you know the recent crisis that Sri Lanka went through, there were shortages of petrol, and these people's livelihoods were impacted. We started a grant program to have swappable batteries for 2- and 3-wheelers. Why swappable batteries? First of all, if you try to sell them fully electric vehicles, they can't afford it. We're talking about, you know, the lower end of the pyramid. With swappable batteries, you reduce the cost by 50 to 60% for the actual vehicle, and the battery is the rest of the cost. It's easier for them to get financing to buy that. And the other side of the coin, it's also easier for us to finance the company that owns the swappable batteries, because now they kind of fit the mold that most banks are looking for. They're a commercial entity, you can do a credit rating on them, and you can really do this on a very large scale. It makes it more affordable for the people who are doing the swappable batteries, because they're just paying on a daily basis as they use the batteries, just like they do with their petrol. But the actual cost per kilometer traveled is cheaper.
So you're empowering the individual actors at the same time as creating a scalable and financeable operation.
And we required that these all be solar charged or renewable charged batteries, which also created another opportunity for large scale companies to supply that power, which is also financeable. And the last part is counting carbon credits, which I think is important. We're able to do that with these batteries,
all right,
because we can track them.
All right, great. That's a good starting example. And I hope all of you have got similar kind of ideas as to how reframing these things can start. And Faiza, let me come to you on this, because as we know, the ADB and Pakistan have a long and deep and wide relationship, and sometimes not one that's working in the way that maybe they should. So, you know, give us some examples from your experience of how the existing systems might change and new ideas that need to come into the thinking process.
Thank you. So for me, I think the energy transition is all about disruption, right? Is it working? Hello? Okay, it is working. Yeah, so for me, energy transition is all about disruption, right? And it's all about disruptive thinking. It's about disruptive innovation. It's about really accelerating the pace of what you're doing in the energy or climate change space with a new mindset, with an innovative mindset, with a disruptive mindset. It's questioning the brick and mortar, right? What I've seen in my personal in my experiences as a practitioner, now as an advisor, things that have actually worked in Pakistan, for example, as Matthew rightly pointed, are things that made a business case, are things that got the consumers involved, are things that were consumer facing, that were collective action, that were not only done by the governments and led by the governments, but got the utilities involved, got the consumers involved, got the communities involved. Energy transitioning is a whole change of mindset. It's a change of this thinking. It's a change with collective action coming to the table. What has specifically worked in Pakistan, for example, I think the whole distributed solar generation, backed by net metering, which made it a business case for any residential consumer to have solar on their household, made a tremendous change. Now we have megawatts of energy, solar energy installed, distributed over households as compared to one IPP that I personally ran after for 5 years. Right? We kept running around circles like a cat chasing its tail, and it could not happen because the political will was not quite aligned at that time. Then we thought to make it a smart business case and to get the consumers involved and to make it something that is affordable, it's reliable, and every household would opt for it because it's cheaper. It's just cheaper, and it makes economic sense to put a solar on your rooftop with the net metering rather than paying the electricity bills. So that worked out. PFAN recently came to Pakistan a couple of years ago, flying away from our ACF conversations, and that has been a huge success. On the contrary, I have personally been on the board of Dimer Basha Dam, one of the largest hydropower projects of South Asia, I believe, not only Pakistan. For years and years, nearly a decade, we have been having conversations but nothing has really happened, which is very frustrating for an actionable, practical person like myself from the private sector. So I think this energy transition requires a bold and disruptive thinking to really take up actionable projects, actionable actions collectively, and think out of the box and think differently. And wherever we have stepped out of the conventional box of doing big ticket size dam projects, big ticket size typical conventional projects involving the governments, we've seen success. So it's really time to step up with the disruptive mindset.
But again, how? Give me an example.
How?
Something in Pakistan that
Yeah,
might...
so for example, involve the private sector, involve the communities, make it a business case. Do not only depend on the typical government contracts. So ADB can really look at smaller ticket size, for example, projects which involve the private sector. PFAN has made huge success because they've just talked to the private sector. They told the private sector, guys, if you have a climate finance project which is ready to be funded, come to us. And I think the pipeline is already full and they're already investing. So think about smaller ticket sizes. You don't have to check the box with your big balance sheets, but maybe look at a climate balance sheet. Maybe talk about the impact. Maybe talk about the carbon emissions. Maybe talk about the impact it will have on people, on communities, on consumers, rather than only checking off the megawatts, right? Because usually the megawatts are checked off on paper and don't really come down to reality.
Richard,
in my example.
Could you comment a little bit on some of the stuff that Fiz is talking about and your experience in this space?
Well, I think I like to wind the conversation back a little bit to talk about the ecosystem and the elements that come together with that. And I think the disruption piece comes into that ecosystem thinking as well. There's a lot of interdependency. I think one of the challenges is not looking at the project or the micro geography, but thinking about the wider supply chain, because there's going to be areas where different regions or communities can adapt differently. There's a piece there, I think, that we need to think both of the electrons we need, as well as in energy transformation, the molecules. Because it'll be hard to decarbonise sectors that do need the molecules. And so it's not just about solar and wind. And that indicates further supply chain challenges. Now, something we've looked at quite recently was about the importation of the molecules around Asia. And whether it be hydrogen, ammonia, synthetic methane or other derivatives, there are different transportation and storage risks that come with that from other fuels. And there's actually very few ports, for instance, within the Asian context that can be expanded or operated under current risk regimes to handle bulk future molecules, if you like. So I think that supply chain about where they come from, how they're utilised, and how we decarbonise the whole environment is a key. The other piece I like to put up there as a challenge is thinking about the regulation piece, and we can come to that. And there's others on the panel with far more experience than me. But the regulation piece comes up to the risk of threat of existing revenue streams for regulators, for asset owners, for local governments, etc. And there's certain cases here. There's one we've been talking about this week in the Philippines and other conversations, which was a waste to energy plant that was set to go. But the risk of losing tipping fees for rubbish in an unsustainable sense killed the project about waste to energy. And so I think there has to be that encouragement in the financing consideration about who are the winners and who are the losers in the transformation, and making it easy for both sides of the coin.
Just back to the ports that you mentioned there and the infrastructure regionally. Are the bottlenecks in supply chains and the bottlenecks in this transportation network and progress, are they a feature of the system, or are they just things that we haven't got around to yet? If they're a feature of the system, what needs changing?
Well, I think there's an opportunity rather than a risk in this. If you think about a lot of the large-scale products, they come from very limited producers in very few countries. And so, a lot of those items are long lead time items. And I think there's a huge opportunity in this region for investment into local manufacture. Critical minerals were mentioned previously, but the mining, the processing, the manufacture, in a way to de-bottleneck some of those areas in the supply chain are very much there. So the ports piece is probably a physical constraint about land use planning of the past, and a port that's been operating for 500 years might be crowded out and not have the free space for safe operations of hazardous fuels. where other spaces are available for that. So I think there's a mix, but I think it's an opportunity about the Asian region actually becoming more self-sufficient in development. So there's jobs and economic opportunity to build and manufacture more locally rather than waiting on suppliers, and therefore debottling some of that long haul. And part of that is decarbonisation, because one of the most carbon intensive elements is shipping fleets.
I saw earlier on Jamie Leather was in the room. Are you still here, Jamie? There he is, right at the back. Jamie Leather's the head of transport at the ADB. And if you want to answer that question now or come in a little bit later, Jamie. All right, well, but I do want you to comment on this after we finish this particular round of comments. But it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on how the ADB views this issue and the structures designed to try and address it. While we do that, let's come to Melody and the big ocean. And you are ADB, so you can talk a little bit about the systems as well. But talk about your role in the big oceans and give us some examples about how things could be done better.
Well, let me start off with, ADB has been working in the ocean space for quite some time. It's not as visible as it has been in the past, or it's more visible now as we're moving towards this greater understanding and greater awareness of the climate, ocean, nature nexus. But as we were discussing earlier, it's about a serious shift of mindset that's needed, because we need to move away from the business as usual, and we need to have more agile mechanisms and approaches to deliver on sustainable development in harmony with nature. And I think that's essentially why I'm on the panel today, to talk about how we do it in harmony with nature. But this is where is the space for emerging areas for ADB? As we see, we've had this new operations model. And so where is emerging areas in this space? And when we talk about climate change and the intense attention that we have on climate change, on climate actions, sometimes we forget that environmental degradation is really at the core of all of these issues. Now, when we talk about the blue economy, and I don't know if everybody knows the facts about the blue economy, it's measured to be between 3 to 6 trillion US dollars, which is actually a sizable amount, and it's enough to qualify for the G7. And if you look at it, it's also double the reported GDP of Italy. And the ocean covers more than 2/3 of the Earth's surface. So technically, based on its geographical cover and its reported annual turnover, it should be classified as the blue continent because of its large amount right there. And even when we talk about economic zones and exclusive economic zones, you look at small island developing states, but actually they're big ocean states. So we should be calling them BOS now. And we look at Kiribati and the cover that Kiribati has, even compared to the Philippines, of the amount of coastline that's covered by the Philippines as compared to Kiribati. And also, maybe last point on the exclusive economic state, exclusive economic zones. The big ocean states, there's 10 million square miles, making up approximately 10% of the world's total ocean surface. So when you think of it from that perspective, you think, how do we become disruptive? And how do we change the game of moving forward? And it comes back to decarbonization. Of course, where decarbonization is possible at this time, and the future of looking forward. So what are the interim solutions and what are the long-term solutions that we can come up with? And even though, for example, shipping, if you look at shipping from that perspective, 90% of global trade volume is seaborne, but maritime transport is critical to Asia and Pacific, with 60% of the goods loaded and unloaded to developing ports. But if you look at the IMO, that's adopted the GHG strategy for international shipping, we need to be at net zero by 2050. And how are we going to reach that? And when we talk about future fuels, ships would require more frequent bunking, and 40% of maritime cargo is actually energy related, and ports are at the nexus of the energy transition.
I see Dan Millison in the room, and his motif, his catchphrase is, there is no planet B, we live on planet C, SEA, which I guess speaks to your agenda. But Melody, tell me about, is the ADB's existing systems and infrastructure coping with the redefinition of BOS rather than SIDS?
I think with the changes that we've had recently with the revisiting of our strategy 2030, with our new 4 shifts, I'm sure everybody's read about all the new operating model that we have in place. I think we are well positioned and well situated to address these challenges. And it's essentially looking at opportunities for cooperation and collaboration and partnership with the different institutions that we engage with. And on the other hand, when you look at the countries that we're working with our DMCs, it's also a perspective of meeting them where they're at and understanding the language that's needed, the media that's needed to share the information and to get us to that speed of where we need to be to move towards decarbonization.
All right, fantastic. So folks, before I give Lorraine a chance to put her comments in, I'm going to ask you to reflect on some of this, and I want to hear some feedback from you guys in a minute after Lorraine has had her say.
Okay, so how does this relate to regulators and the role that regulators can play? I think going back to what Taimur said, bold vision requires new paradigms. Regulators often are viewed as the barriers to innovation. So it's up to regulators, and there are many in the room, I can see them, are my colleagues and good friends. It really is, we have to look at ourselves as well. The regulatory framework can be a barrier, but it also, if it's a correct regulatory framework, if there's leadership in the regulation, and many times the regulators are asked to implement the policies from our ministries, from our energy offices, from the other decision makers that have tasked, you get it done. So how do we get it done? By virtue of doing more innovation, not being an economic regulator reacting, but by being proactive, by being adaptive regulators to help facilitate adaptive regulation. And I would posit this, that the big ocean states, the island grid systems, have the ability to be able to demonstrate things faster, implement them faster. We can manage things faster as a result of smaller grid systems. We can be the learning laboratory like Hawaii has been, sending postcards from the future. We can innovate and work with the stakeholders. And it's the actions that make a difference. We can talk these, lofty goals and principles, but when it comes down to implementing it, how do you change the regulation? Well, we try to get away from cost of service, CapEx types of models. Can we change the energy industry to be more of a service, energy management? These are the roles of utilities anyway, as they're meeting the challenges for climate change and asked to do more with climate mitigation, adaptation, resilience, reliability of energy services. It's cross-sector, so many things involve water, telecommunications, transportation in terms of decarbonization. So really, the regulator needs to look at their role as a leader in this process. And I want to cite a specific example from Hawaii. Performance-based regulation. We are the only state in the US, and I see some colleagues here from the US, from USAID, and some of our US partners who are very active in this region. They know we were the first to actually implement performance-based regulation, where instead of looking just at cost of service and incentivizing CapEx, big spend projects, it's about really getting outcomes and key performance indicators, which is something that was never heard of before in the utility industry, performance incentive mechanisms so that you can incent utilities to save money, be more affordable, and then use that cost savings instead of a 2-cent or 1-cent rebate to customers, use it to deploy it to priority areas like grid modernization, because we can't have increased renewable energy without a robust modern grid infrastructure that can accommodate the intermittent renewables that are challenging. Yeah, and if we really want to do rural microgrids, we need to also make sure that infrastructure is there. And part of it is actually some basic things like advanced rate design, rates that empower customers to be active partners. I think some of our colleagues on the panel today talked about, getting customers involved, getting the prosumers involved, concentrating more on the demand side, as Matt said. They can be there with the technology tools now to support the transition and to accelerate the transition. So that's, I think, the challenge, but it's also the opportunity that islands will lead in this. We will lead in this. I am positive about it.
Fantastic.
We have.
Great stuff. Nice, provocative, thoughtful, insightful round of opening comments, folks. And I hope you guys will sort of interact with each other's comments as well, because I mean the way you guys are talking, similar themes, and see if you can pick up on what the other panelists have said. But before that, let's get to some thoughts from the floor. And I see a couple of hands up already, which is fantastic. But I do want to go to Jamie first on this issue of transport and how the ADB looks at the emerging areas agenda for the transport.
quiet.
Thank you very much. And
Come on up, come on up.
your point of we can't be in our silos is absolutely essential. And I think this is an amazing discussion. Let me just quickly pick on a couple of items. It's sort of the micro level, the two-wheelers, the three-wheelers, the battery swapping, financial wherewithals for the SMEs. That is one area that's vitally important. Perhaps at the other extreme in terms of trying to decarbonize on the logistics side, so picking up on the maritime sector. This may be an opportunity, and I'm always on the positive side, to leapfrog, just like mobile phones did from landline phones. There's huge bottlenecks in the logistics side. We must move to new fuels, and ADB is working across many different sectors, particularly in our specific area, but also domestic shipping, to try and ensure that we're not just future-proofing, but leading in terms of that decarbonisation. Thanks.
Any thoughts? Comebacks? Panel? No?
Sure.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Completely agree that we need to be thinking across all sectors. And I love Lorraine's point about impact and performance, right? For a long time, we've been using what I would say maybe one of the wrong metrics to measure success. You know, is the fact that a loan returns X in IRR the right return, or is it the impact that it creates?
Yeah.
We have to have both. I recognize that markets require, you know, financial returns, but we also need to make sure that when we're putting those financial resources to work, we're getting at the impacts we want and measure and reward for those impacts.
Fantastic.
Yeah. An impact balance sheet.
I like to sort of challenge it as well with taking that very long-term view. If you talk to shipping fleets, you know, a commercial shipping fleet has a usable life, you know, of say 20 plus years. So you've got to think about leapfrogging that technology now for fleets that'll be operating that far out. And the same goes for all energy infrastructure. We're currently seeing, you know, say, for instance, I'll pick on the US here. There's been a change of cycle in the last 12 or 18 months where it's gone from focusing on renewables to sweating the existing oil and gas assets. Exploration has started in vigor again for new gas and oil fields, etc. And so you can understand organisations want to sweat their existing assets, but what's the encouragement there can be to change that early? What can be encouraged to invest in that future fleet or that future asset rather than, you know, the existing process of, you know, just keeping the old thing going with some string and glue or something until it, you know, finally breaks. So I think there's got to be the regulatory models, the finance models in sustainability to kind of consider those areas. And I like the idea of, you know, the telephone networks that in some countries they had the privilege of moving from copper cable to jump to only having, you know, satellite communications and mobile networks and not have to replace it. So how do we encourage those areas not to move progressively, but to leapfrog?
Okay, Peter, you had a comment. So I'll come to you in a second, sir. Let's get a comment from Peter.
They're here. The mic. Right. Second row.
Up at the front, please.
Here,
Here.
here.
Put your hand up, Peter, and she'll bring you a microphone.
Yeah.
Peter DuPont from Asia Clean Energy Partners and ASEF Groupie. So I have just a quick comment on the supply chain discussion that Richard was in. Just to let people know, there was a 4 hours of deep dive yesterday on critical mineral and clean energy technology supply chain. And I'm part of a team of experts who's helping ADB to develop an approach on how to make supply chains for critical minerals and clean energy technologies more sustainable and resilient. So if you want to know about that, this led by Annika Seiler and also Pradeep Tarakan. Question I have, it's sort of something that's missing in the discussion, the concept of electrify everything, because really if you look at Bill Gates' recent book and also Saul Griffith, who's been talking about this for many, many years, to get to net zero, we're going to have to really electrify almost everything. So I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that. It's not really being discussed. There was a really good session here on Monday on 24/7, which is sort of along the same lines, but I haven't heard that. Like, it's going to have huge impacts, relative to what, demand projections were. They're going to be a lot higher, but the overall benefits will be great.
All right, thanks, Peter. Lorraine?
Let me address that. I mean, in a concrete way. I think in many of the Pacific Island nations, and also for sure in Hawaii, we've been addressing that in terms of, it's the Internet of Things right now, and the role of the utility is different. It's managing that complex network of across sector, telecom, transportation, even water, wastewater industries. They all rely on energy. And so it is incumbent upon the utility to take this new role of being the manager of energy services management, not necessarily maybe being the provider of the generation, because customers are going to be able to do that by themselves with rooftop solar, with other potential renewable energy. Even residential customers in Hawaii are generating their own energy, rooftop solar, and with the right, again, rate designs, incentives, and performance measures in place to align that. But it is very important to do that. I mean, it is, how do you really achieve a decarbonization strategy for your entire economy? And it is, and for certain areas, it won't necessarily be, the conventional renewables. It might be some other means of new technologies now, like energy storage, which you can't have renewables in Hawaii without energy storage. It's a large scale. And in fact, in Hawaii, we have behind the meter energy storage. So customers, I have my own, energy storage battery on my house, partially for resilience, partially to be part of a demand side support program to provide grid support to the utility on an island grid. So that's what I'm saying. You can transform the entire economy if you plan, and it's integrated planning with not only the grid and the energy sector, but going and having conversations with other sectors within your region, and it's cross-regional partnering and collaboration and coordination that's going to achieve that decarbonization, true decarbonization. And I think this region is particularly positioned to do that.
Yeah, no, I agree that we're going to electrify everything if we're going to get to net zero. But in that process, there are huge opportunities if you think outside the box. And for utilities, they have to start thinking that way if they want to really survive in this new environment. For example, you can't just be the supplier of electrons. You need to look at who else can add electrons or store them for you. In my state of Maryland, I think we're the first state in the US to pass a V2G law. It requires the utilities to now provide the ability for my Tesla that sits in my garage 90% of the time idle to be actually a battery storage system for the utility, and I get credit for it. So, making it maybe a little bit more affordable. I think energy efficiency is also going to be a very important part as we look at how we manage loads and variable renewable energy. We need to include everybody. We need to democratize the power sector, the energy sector, to allow not just the single players that we used to have or were used to, but to have everybody as a player and participate. So.
Just to add to Matthew's point of democratization and including everybody, especially the communities, a small example from Pakistan. The northern areas of Pakistan, I don't know how many of you are familiar with them, but many areas don't have access to the grid. There is no grid there. When the KPK government decided to take the grid up there, it was humongous cost. It was not being suitable or convenient. Being on the board, we went to the locations and we realized that we just need to change the mindset. We need to be bold. We need to be disruptive. We need to think out of the box. If the grid can't go there, what else is there? And there were these beautiful streams of running water across all the villages and all the communities in the mountains. And we set up this whole community-based micro hydro project there, which was funded by USAID as well. Small ticket size, community-based, household-based, micro hydro projects, run-of-the-mill, 10 kilowatt, 12 kilowatt, 15 kilowatt to manage a cluster of homes, a cluster-based model. The woman got involved, gender equality got checked. I was very happy. The community owned the project. They all had their individual roles in it, and it became a fantastic thing. So electricity for all, yes, but in very innovative, out of the way, out of the box thinking approach, which I also think applies to ADB in its climate financing approach, because I personally feel that model needs to reinvent. In my 20 years of being a practitioner and an advisor, you talk about millions of dollars and billions of dollars, and it's great. But at times where I've seen impact, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars that's made the impact, really.
So the question being, how do we get to that point, Peter? I don't know. What are the obstacles to getting everything electrified? Are they systemic? Are they financial? Are they political? Any thoughts? And anyone in the audience? Anyone here? Peter, what's holding you up from pursuing that agenda?
He wants to say something. He wants a mic. He has something to say. You can tell.
I can say something. Okay, you say something.
So I'm Navneet Trivedi. I also come from a island, but it's a Manhattan Island. So it's very different from rest of the islands.
How fancy.
I kind of disagree with this notion that you want to electrify everything, because we are kind of attempting that in the US and it is very hard. But I agree with the fact that customer participation is critical, but how to get there? Because yes, all the discussion here is on the supply side, how we can, but I think without working on the demand side, as you said, and customers, we are not going to achieve that. Now, the question is what that electrification means. I think that realistically, you have a lot of efficiency still you can gain, because we were doing like lighting replacements and all, and that's what's called energy efficiency. Now we are trying to get deeper. Like in the US, I am working with some projects where we are trying to electrify homes. And the challenges are very different. And like if you are sitting here as a funding agency, you may be doing project financing. And in the afternoon, I'm going to talk about policy-based loans. But the thing is, if you are going to do decarbonization of homes and electrify everything, the challenge is very different. The customer is, first of all, not like a monolithic kind of thing. There are low income customers, their challenges are different. And the question is like how you will meet everybody where they are. So I don't know whether we need to have that, electrification, like everything has to be electrified. It can be a vision, but it cannot be a goal in my view. And then on the other side, there are definitely a lot of business model challenges which need to be kind of addressed in that.
Fantastic. Thank you. Anyone want to comment on that? Melody.
Well, perhaps not comment, but perhaps just add an additional perspective from a regional perspective, because we're talking about, of course, our island states and the grids and the issues that they have. But when we look on the other side of Asia and how to think outside the box of utilizing, for example, a country that may have, for example, Laos, which was supposed to be or is supposed to be the battery of Asia, and how do we distribute that energy across the region? It's more about regional cooperation and how, as a group, to think outside the box and work together.
Yeah, we're just building on that. Singapore is buying electricity from Laos and taking it through the existing networks of Thailand and Malaysia. So that's adapting the existing networks to operate in a different way. But I was going to sort of also challenge the idea about electrifying everything. Because electrons are not going to be the solution for everything, but they can be part of what might be other fuels along the way. Because we spoke earlier about shipping, replacing bunker oil with batteries won't work for, just on a weight basis and a size and scale basis, but alternate fuels that are created through electrolysis or other means is potential solution. So, I think we've got to think about our supply chains in that way. And the other one is that, I think from the regulation piece, I think we've got to think about the cultural dynamic that regulation can have. And I know from a personal experience, the first solar panels I put on my home, there were a nice feed-in tariff. That changed the way we operated our household, because we wanted to export as many electrons as we could and then use power when it was cheap. When that model changed by regulation, and there was no longer a benefit of exporting, we wanted to operate the home with maximum power use when we are producing our own electrons. So I think we can almost gamify regulation to optimize how networks operate.
All right. There's a chap there, they've been waiting very patiently, but
I just
quickly.
want a
then.
short
Yeah,
correction.
go ahead.
I agree that you need molecules and that hydrogen and a hydrogen economy is important. But how do we get hydrogen?
Electrons.
Electrolysis. So it's coming from electricity. So, I mean, in the broadest scope, we need to decide, we need to work on how to cheaply produce electricity.
So just very
Right,
quickly,
so
what are the
it's about
takeaways? What are
electrifying
the takeaways from this interaction? I mean, anyone want to make a conclusion from this?
I won't conclude, but I have a question for Lorraine, which is related to this and what Richard just said. The reality, just challenge what you said, the regulators have to be proactive. I agree with that and anticipatory. The reality in Southeast Asia is just a mess. If you're trying to do solar rooftop or adjacent solar IPPs, and this has been going on for years. So how do we sort of knock heads and, get past these regulatory blockages? Because I see some people talking about, oh, I have a business and I want to only work in unregulated space. Well, that won't work, if you're talking about households and stuff.
All right, let's let Lorraine pick up on that quickly.
Sure, sure. It's very important. And so, it has to be clear it has to be clear and, for better or for worse, regulators are not the ones that set the policy. Regulators are the implementers of the policy, but they can weigh in. And when the policy is being discussed, they can, because of their imprimatur as being more objective, of being the ultimate deciders of some of these things when they do get implemented, of convening the right stakeholders in the room. But I would say that the reason that many of, Hawaii for sure, and many of the other Pacific Island countries are able to take the lead is that their ministries, their legislatures have clearly set the requirements. 100% renewable energy by 2045 in Hawaii, 100% decarbonization by 2045 of all sectors in Hawaii. That is a clear marching order, then delegate it down to the particular agencies, and the regulator to implement that. If that is not clear, then yes, you don't have that clear path forward. So that is an important area that the development community here, the ecosystem, needs to empower countries that are struggling with this now to do those things. And I just from looking in the Asia Pacific region, many of the countries, whether it's the ASEAN countries or Pacific Island, big ocean states, they've set forward policies. Their ministries, their governments have said, we are committed to this out of COP28. We are going to do this, but yeah, devil's in the details, right? How do you actually get it done?
And
That's the
identifying the
challenge.
pain points is important.
Yeah.
But I do want some takeaways. I do want people to conclude something from this at some point. Sorry, this gentleman has been waiting very patiently for a long time here.
I was going to change topics, so if you want to look
Well, I think we've done this a lot. So let's get, because there's a lot of hands going up.
All right, Amr Barghouth with Chemonics International. I want to go back to the demand point, which was excellent. And you asked us to be provocative, and I'll be provocative. I'd like to propose that we have a blind spot as energy practitioners. We spend so much time talking about decarbonizing the energy uses of the present and the past, and a lot less time about understanding the future uses of energy, specifically as they relate to climate adaptation. There are people that are working on that. We have a little bit of understanding of the cooling needs that we have, the shifts in work time, outdoors, we need to work at night, we need lighting for that. But really to have a solid understanding of the energy needs of climate adaptation, I think is still an open question, and one that we need to start addressing instead of just, it's important to decarbonize everything else, but we really need to understand how we're going to save the lives of billions of people with the energy systems that we have.
Matthew, I don't want you to comment on this because it's your ballpark. Anyone want to respond to that?
Well, I think there's a challenge which is perhaps maybe either side of the coin is velocity versus politics. This year, so much of the world is going to elections and not much is happening, and people are trading off policy. Our direction is testing the market for votes, and they're thinking about the next election far more than the planet we live on, perhaps. So, and when we think about energy change and infrastructure and investment, we're talking decades ahead, future thinking of what it's going to be like. And I think back to, like the first wind farms I was involved in planning, designing, and being involved in the finance of are end of life. But the planning process that took place with those never considered the repowering and what it'd be. And so the owners of those assets have to go back to square one to think about how they repower, back to 5 years worth of approvals and those things just to repower them, because masts are different, turbines are different, blades are bigger, and all the rest of it that goes with that. So I think we've got a real chance here to not only think about the future needs of what energy looks like, but think about the, I guess, the complete life cycle, the virtuous cycle of energy in a sustainability sense of how we plan for that change over the life cycle of the assets, and it's incremental. So, I go back to, when we think about we're closing coal mines and coal plants at the moment, in many countries, the legislation never considered the mine would be closed. All right. So there's that challenge.
Richard, thank you. Thomas, did you want to go back to the electrification thing?
No, I just had a brief comment. I mean, Indonesia, and they didn't even have a where is it? Oh,
Regulator.
Hello. Testing. Now switch it on.
Switch it on.
You got to turn it on.
Well,
Runs on electrons.
Leave it to an engineer.
No, not me. So yeah, talk about grandfather, Matthew and I, old school. But I mean, they don't even, in Indonesia, they don't even have a regulator. So I'm sitting here listening to you say we need to regulate, and they have policies and they don't enforce. So I'm just saying there's many, and I think there's other countries just like that. So I think one of the areas is to just actually get regulators like you in place, because there is none. You got the big 1,000-pound gorilla, PLN, state-owned utility in Indonesia, right?
Rafael.
Hi, my name is Rafael. Actually, I have two words in my title out of this slide, which is emerging areas. I am an ADB. I'm a relatively newcomer, and I'm supposed to work on emerging areas. So I have a very quick and very pragmatic question. Some of you mentioned about creating climate balance sheet. We are climate bank. Please tell us your views or your key, concrete, pragmatic way how to create the balance sheet. We know how to create financial balance sheet. We've done it, but tell us how to create climate balance sheet.
Ooh.
Take it on, Fiza.
Yeah. So what we discussed earlier, Rafael, in terms of not just measuring the millions and billions of dollars being invested, but the impact of every 100,000 that you're creating. So really not just going with the typical dams and hydropower projects and big scale projects of decarbonization, which look really good on paper. And it's my personal example because we've always done smaller projects that have really created impact. And as I said earlier, those smaller projects, be it electric vehicles, be it my lighting 1 million lives with my Roshna Bibis of solar household, woman-led energy enterprise, or distributed solar generation, it has always been the impact of the smaller ticket size items. So the climate balance sheet could really be the actual impact. How many communities are you involving? What political will are you changing? What impact are you creating? What enabling dialogues have you created? What have you contributed to the ecosystem? And one example that I had in mind, which I was waiting to share here as well for ADB to rethink its approach, it's not just the direct investment that will make the difference. It is creating that enabling ecosystem for the investments to flow. Another example going back from Pakistan, when the solar industry was established and we had solar PVC companies and EPC companies in the market providing the solar panels, it was just not affordable for commercial institutions or residential homes to buy solar. It was very expensive. What the state bank did, again, the role of the regulator, the central bank, they launched for the first time. It was very innovative. And I've talked about this in multiple countries and not many people have heard about it. They launched the first time ever green banking policy, which was a guarantee mechanism and a collateral mechanism for the commercial banks to lend to these commercial institutions and to lend to the residential homes. So what role did ADB play there? By becoming that guarantee, giving that guarantee mechanism and that collateral, they actually instigated an entire financing ecosystem. So that's where you accelerate the impact by a smaller ticket size of dollars invested.
Can I ask a further question?
Of course.
Maybe Lorraine and the others can help me with that. You mentioned about this looking at the very specific, very grassroots level intervention with a greater impact, which is more measurable, more owned, and perhaps less risky in terms of operation and maintenance and sustainability of assets. But look, we as emerging area, we're working across Asian Pacific, and how to overcome the issue of the Pacific. It's indeed a big ocean state, but still it's really hard to bring Pacific into the investment map, into the investors map. What are the 2-3 things you as a practitioners can tell us, consider looking at the Pacific in terms of the resolving the issue of course, we cannot get things done quickly, but how to address the issue of they being fragmented, far from the main markets, and what would be the key steps, concrete measures, which you think as a practitioner can help either private sector or investors or developers to go back and see, oh, the Pacific is a market for us.
Is that for someone in particular?
Well, can I just share with that? Because I think we just had the discussion. The opera members have had 2 days of discussions, and we just actually addressed this in terms of, on each individual country, island, or in each individual jurisdiction, people are looking for the same things. We want to bring projects here to, to integrate more renewables. We want to do grid modernization. We want to address building a skilled workforce of energy sector jobs, but one-offs in terms of one small country versus the other. We need to leverage that together, and with a combined a regional coordination or combining that, which we have the entities. I mean, Opera is trying to have that conversation and bringing these projects to scale and bringing so that the market and bigger private sector partners see this makes sense, and we can come in here at scale. We can do a project, and these people are sophisticated. They come to places like Hawaii. They do these projects. They go to other geographic areas. So in regional areas like Asia Pacific, we see that in ASEAN countries are trying to do this. In the Pacific, we're trying to do this, leveraging the collective coordination, the power of being able to coordinate a project regionally that then makes sense from, in terms of the economics and with the right regulatory message being sent and standardization, de-risking some of that with some more regulatory certainty. This can happen, but it takes hard work of the many stakeholders to come together to talk about it. And I think that's the first step. We have to look at where we can regionally leverage the opportunity so these markets come in and take the lead.
Melody, I haven't heard from you for a while.
Yes, actually, I had 2 points to share. One is with regards to the bunking or the zero carbon bunker fuel perspective. And when you look at maritime and shipping that goes across the world from one end to the other, and how the big ocean states are essentially somewhere in the middle. And when we talk about short distance movement that can use electric batteries, but on the other hand, when you're talking about long distances, that's where alternative fuels come in. And you need to have that intermediate stop in between to refuel. And that's the opportunity, as what Lorraine was sharing, about a regional perspective of working together and also having this bunkering opportunity, of course, bringing in additional economic growth to the region. And just to go back to the discussion earlier about the balance sheet or the climate balance sheet, when we look at it from another perspective with regards to natural capital accounting, which seems to be quite well discussed or more recently discussed these days, this is something that should be taken into account. From an ADB perspective, looking at it from project preparation or concept stage discussions, we need to take these into consideration and also put the climate aspect.
Fantastic. We're getting a little bit short on time, folks. Can I get a couple more questions in from the audience? I know you all want to speak, but this gentleman's been waiting for a while. Come.
Question.
I just had one word I wanted to add. One word.
No, go ahead.
My name is Herbert Lubis from Indonesia. I have to address these 2 questions to this gentleman and to this gentleman. First of all, when we are talking about balance sheet, okay, the responsibility doesn't belong to only one party like utility company. It is all best effort, all stakeholders. You know why? Because corporation, I asked this gentleman, balance it. The new requirements for corporation to report two things. Number one, international reporting accounting system. You have to put how much investment you do in the renewable or clean energy. The second, sustainability report. This is what we have. You're talking about balance it. The mindset is a green energy, renewable energy investment. When you have carbon, you generate carbon, you have liability. When you have energy, renewable energy, you have asset. You can exchange to credit balance it. Okay. Remember in COP28, okay, 100 trillion GDP, 1/10 of that money should be used for energy transition, which is 10 trillion rupiah, 10 trillion US dollar. This is what we have to do in the what do you call, in the transition program. And secondly, the carbon price supposed to be $800 per ton, not $22.45, because in my country, VCM is not working, voluntary carbon mechanism. So what you have to do, you know, difficult to use CCUS, very expensive. The best way to do is convert your investment to renewable and clean energy. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Let's get another comment here.
Hi, so I'm Kyle Katra. I'm a congressional intern at the House of Representatives here in the Philippines. And I would want to ask some questions regarding giving the skills for development for the local workforces in DMC countries, because I've been hearing a lot of conversations in the committee hearings that I attend. There's a lack of educational, requirements that some of our the people in the workforce are. And I just want to know if the private sector or ADB can aid our legislators or entities to organize and fund technical training programs so that they will develop the skills to produce hydrogen, green ammonia, and all sorts of these other projects. So thank you.
I might lead off on a response on that, but it's a global challenge. And actually last week we did some benchmarking and we're talking with some of the in a forum like this in Australia. And 76% of people in Australia working on renewable projects were not born in Australia. And so and it cascades everywhere that the local workforces, we're competing globally for it. The largest contractor in Australia working on transmission and distribution is training staff in Malaysia to import, to migrate into Australia to close that gap out. So I think there's something that the demand is, it's a global workforce, and just trying to recruit from each other is not going to solve the problem. So that whole ecosystem view about how we can collaborate on training and take that at a national, international level is a really big piece, because otherwise one country will pay a few more dollars, encourage the workforce, and everyone else misses out. And that's not going to lead to any great outcome by 2050.
Matthew, you wanted to say something. Let's sort of begin to move towards a point where we wrap up some of these themes and come. As I said, let's have some recommendations. Right. Let's have some takeaways. Let's have some concrete action points.
I'll address Raphael's point about carbon balance sheets, and then I'll give a recommendation. All right. So first of all, let's start with the carbon balance sheet globally. Most of the developing countries we're working with, compared to the developed countries, have a balance sheet that's much less. And so I recognize we're all on the same planet. We all need to solve the problem. And going forward with the population that we have in Asia, we can't afford to replicate the past. We have to transition. So when you're faced with such a large challenge, we were faced with the challenge of poverty in the 50s and 60s, right after the World War II. What did the World Bank and the other multilateral development banks do? They created IDA, a long-term investment facility with low interest rates to help countries like India and Indonesia and China and everyone else get out of poverty, because they recognized that you needed patient capital in order to solve a big, long-term, giant problem. We have the same situation today. Developing countries need long-term patient capital to address the transition at all levels. And don't get me wrong, there's not one solution here. We need to talk about infrastructure. We need to talk about molecules. We need to talk about everything that we've been talking about here, but it's all going to be driven by finance. And finance is not easy if you've got interest rates like we have now, and you're trying to do some of these capital intensive projects. It's incumbent on the developed world that mostly control these institutions and who have the capital to start thinking about an IDA equivalent.
But the
for
problem's not
transition.
interest rates, is it? I mean, we've had record
it
low
is.
interest rates for almost a decade now.
But
There was plenty of opportunity.
We'd be
for
much further along the line if it wasn't.
Hmm.
Trust me. It comes down. Everybody's decision at the end of it is made on return on investment. It's a lot easier to make a return on investment on if you have a debt of 5% or less than it is if you've got 10% or more. I'll stop there.
All right. Fiza, you had a point you wanted to make? No. Okay.
Yeah, no, we're wrapping up.
Well, let's get a final question, a couple of final questions. There's a gentleman in the back and down here. So you go ahead.
Sure, thanks. Jason Hutchison, App Global. Really interesting forum today. Wanted to throw out one tool that's already out there from one of the questions that we have heard a few times, and then ask a question regarding a theme I keep hearing. So in terms of the tool, we're talking about balance sheets, and no tool is perfect, but did want to flag that Economist Impact last year put out something called the Infrastructure for Good Barometer, which goes a very long way towards identifying what are those social, economic, and climate factors that need to be brought in aside from your financial balance sheet things. And it also lays out about 20 different areas of policy and regulatory reforms or different things like that where you can measure progress. So wanted to flag that that's out there at least as a starting point in looking at these types of things. But also, you know, we've heard a lot about how you can make big impact from a small grant program in Sri Lanka, or a community-based program in Pakistan, or an island investment. We need to be able to do that at scale for the energy transition and getting from the billions to trillions of dollars. And with commercial finance, it's really difficult to get the finance charges low enough on a one-off project. So how do we better bundle these different projects? How do we work together to better bundle it, whether you're talking about a collection of 100 rooftop solar mini grids or a portfolio of buildings that needs energy efficiency upgrades, or when we're talking about Pacific Island states that sometimes collaborate and sometimes are jealous of the opportunities afforded a bigger market.
All right. And before we start wrapping up, just quick comment from Dan.
I wanted to go back to the IMO regulations.
Very quickly, Dan.
Yeah, quick. So the IMO regulations are going to do more for the transition than the UNFCCC will, because the IMO regulations are actually enforceable and enforced, and they're global. And the UNFCCC is not an enforcement regime, and it's not designed to actually solve the climate change problem. So ADB did a report that was published earlier this year on cleaner shipping, that focused on the ports as the entry point for finance. And I think a subtle point that no one mentioned, that report says that 90% of maritime shipping occurs within national boundaries, not transnational. It's not international shipping. So ADB has the opportunity to intervene with cleaner fuels at the ports. We don't have to do $1 trillion to create a global green hydrogen supply chain. And I have an engineering colleague who says, hey, we can modify existing diesel engines, including marine diesels, to run on hydrogen. So we can make hydrogen at the port with grid supplied electricity that comes from a hydropower plant that's only running 4 hours, 5 hours a day.
Right.
And is ADB doing this? If not, I might have a project to bring to you. And I'm not. I work part-time for ADB, but I'm not wearing my ADB hat right now.
Is ADB doing this? And also the question on the back. I mean, in an environment where we have so many new players in this system, it's no longer just the governments and the banks and the financiers. It's all these little small players. Can we and should we look for ways of scaling that stuff. So there are two final things, and then your wrap up thoughts as well. So let's start with you, Melody, and the point that Dan made.
No, actually, exactly. The report that I've been discussing or touching upon was exactly that report that, and looking forward into the future, working together within AEDB, there are opportunities for such endeavors. But perhaps to add to that, when we talk about, and I apologize, going back to natural capital accounting, we see that as a mechanism moving forward to be able to access concessional loans. Because if countries have their natural capital accounting in place, then this can be utilized as leverage, essentially asking to see how loans can be provided at concessional rates to move forward on these aspects.
All right. Final thoughts.
Not I agree with that, but not pancaking the idea. I think the other piece is coming back to a question earlier is the supply chain and the aggregation piece. And one takeaway here is for rather than having lots and lots of small projects, how do we build a program that can bring in something like some seed funding through ADB or others, but then bring in private finance into that mix to top out, and it might be the scale and the financial robustness then to bring in pension fund money or private investment that way to bring it together on aggregated projects of scale, whether it be in country or across countries in a region.
No, just adding on to that, for me, I think regional coordination is going to be top of the line. Sharing successes, because we don't have time to reinvent the wheel. If somebody's done it somewhere, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's accelerate that. To answer the gentleman's question, bringing in collective projects, bringing in collective stakeholders to make it lucrative for the private sector to invest as well, and not make it small ticket size or small impact size. So hence, regional coordination a must. I think remodeling the entire climate finance space, what we've already talked about, moving away from the balance sheet to the climate balance sheet, redefining KPIs.
That's pretty easy, isn't it?
Yeah, we start thinking today, you do it tomorrow, don't you? Redefining KPIs, redefining ticket sizes, not just talking about billions of dollars, but talking about how many hundreds of thousands of dollars we can invest to create that right impact. And then I think thirdly, and from, again, personal experience, just being bold and disruptive to really understand the problem and go out with a solution and pick out on the low-hanging fruit. So not reinvent the wheel, be bold and disruptive. And I think that is the mindset we need to have for the energy transition.
Yeah, so closing remarks, I would start by saying, we need all the solutions that we can get. We need to empower them. There's no miracles needed. The technology is there. We know how to do it. It's a question of getting regulations and policy and the enabling environment right to allow 1,000 flowers to bloom, because that's what's going to take to make this transition. Everybody has a role to play, whether you're a consumer or a producer. We need to think and continue, I think, as development institutions, not to forget the poor and leave them behind. So the solutions that we put forward should reach down to empower the poor to earn income and be employed and lift themselves as well, because ultimately that's the world I want to see my grandchildren to see, because the world that we're seeing now is certainly not what I want to leave them in. It's not a pretty place.
Lorraine.
Well, I think from the regulator's perspective, as far as regulators are in the room, I call on you to maintain the vision, to keep the vision to your commitments to promote energy security, in your region, in your backyard, to help do your part with other stakeholders to promote the sustainable economic development. And really, energy is becoming a lot more local, community-based. Many solutions, because of technology now, that are not available. And the gentleman challenged us to, really think ahead about what how does it impact the individual person in the home, in the community? We can't forget that regulators can play that role of bringing people together, and that's how you de-risk the financing, environment, so that you can provide regulatory certainty. You can provide that strength of leadership with a clear vision, and many times we are given the task of implementing. So we have a critical role to play. We fulfill that vision. We go forward with energy. We'll be part of that 1,000 flowers that are blooming that Matt encouraged us to. We have a leadership role to play. And as we say in Hawaii, Imua, let's move forward. Let's go.
Fantastic. Folks, one of the taglines from ACEF 2024, as you see up there, time for urgent action now. And we all know that, right? Question is it going to happen? And one of the themes of this panel has been to try and challenge whether the action we're taking in its current form, urgent or otherwise, is sufficient. Should our urgency be directed elsewhere? And the emerging areas conversation sort of tries to touch on that theme. And, Rafael, do you want to sort of just come up with a few final takeaways from this engagement and tell us how this thing knits up, because you are part of that emerging areas conversation and leading team. So how is it all going to manifest? What are we taking away from this?
Many thanks. I'm very happy to see that I'm not alone here from emerging area team. There is another person here, actually two more, if I'm not mistaken. I'm always inspired by Cindy, who is my colleague in emerging area. And the one thing I always borrow from her is going beyond energy. I think we all need to consider this thinking design and perspective, like going beyond energy. Energy is not objective, it's a mean, right? The other colleague of mine used to say that usually people don't eat electricity, they use it. They use it for productive use. So we need to consider how to go that. I think there are three takeaways for me as a ADB staff from this, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to learn from the panel and the people who asked the question and contributed. Number one is creating the climate balance sheet. It's a collective effort, and thank you for comment made earlier by colleague that this is not a one organization creating the climate balance sheet. It's a collective and it's stakeholder process. That's number one. Number two is regional cooperation matters. And when we talk about Laos, Laos is a part of ASEAN, and Laos is considered and promoted itself as a battery of Asia. But if we look at the how to deliver the battery capacity to ASEAN, it requires at least $20 billion investment into interconnections and all type of infrastructure. So that means regional cooperation. It's a must. It's not a luxury. It's a must. Number three is I'm very happy to have here a lot of friends and colleagues from the Pacific region. And I think what Pacific is teaching us is that the geography in conventional metrics of measurement doesn't fit into the climate agenda, because we're no longer calling them small Pacific states. We're calling them big ocean states, right? And that gives a new perspective, new dimension. And that leads me to the third takeaway. It's to do or to make the time for urgent action now, we need to change our measurement and KPIs. We need to move away from single big ticket items, like Pakistan case is a very excellent example, and this is great that it's been brought. We perhaps should look at the impact. We should look at the project which does have impact, and perhaps the metrics must be calibrated and a harmonized effort among all of us. Instead of the inventing things, we should learn from each other. And many thanks for all the panel members for sharing this. Thanks a lot.
Please show your appreciation for the panel, folks. And thank you all very much for participating. Good to have you all involved. And as Fiza put it, go out and be bold and disruptive. Bye-bye.
Go forward. Go forward.